The first sign was the way the apartment began to sound different, as if the walls had learned to hold their breath and wouldn't let it out. The kettle still whistled at 7:10, and the neighbor's dog still sprinted through the hallway like a kid late to class. But in our rooms, the air got careful, thin, like it was afraid to wake something sleeping under the floorboards. The dinners went quiet first. Not a fight, not even a sigh, just silence that wore silverware like a mask. She'd push a fork against a plate and stop before it made a sound, like noise itself might accuse her of something she wasn't ready to name. Rain pressed against the living room windows as if it wanted in. Strange how rain always knows where to find regret. It taps until the heart opens. It tapped then. It taps now. Her name is Mara. Saying it is like swallowing a small stone. It sinks and waits for a bottom. Some nights she'd miss the train and text me a grainy photo of the platform, running late. No period, no emoji. Just the words themselves, damp and shivering. The smell of takeout would hang over the counter. The cabinets would give me their dim reflections. A chair would be left slightly turned, like it meant to face me but got self-conscious halfway. Little things, keys not exactly where she leaves them. A new scent on her coat that wasn't perfume, more like a hotel hallway in winter, that vague mix of detergent and someone else's plans. I asked once, long day, and she smiled in that careful way that exists to hold back a story instead of telling it. Yeah, she said, and then, softer, I'm tired. She was tired of me, but she didn't yet have the courage to let the sentence finish its journey. The phone started living face down. It used to be our shared little lighthouse. Her screen lit the tabletop like a tide chart, lighting messages from friends, a fast food coupon, a photo of a friend's new dog with paws too big for the rest of him. Then one evening she set the phone down face first and let it sleep like a guilty animal. Helps me focus, she said. Focus on what? I didn't ask. I told myself I trusted her, because that was the story I'd been feeding my own ribs for years. Trust is a quiet thing, but it makes loud promises. And when those promises begin to stutter, you hear the hallway clock more than you hear the person you love. The night I knew was the night the rain didn't blink. The city outside was a film strip of brake lights and wet streets. I had been making soup, the kind she calls Sunday soup, even on a Wednesday, because it tastes like a day that forgives you for being slow. I sprinkled parsley like a hopeful man. She came in with her hair damp at the ends, cheeks flushed, and something too bright in her eyes, like someone had told her a joke in a place where laughter isn't allowed, and she hadn't gotten rid of it yet. You started without me, she said, not looking at the table. I thought you were late, I said. I was, she answered, then found the sink, turned the water on, and stared at her hands as if they were a confession she didn't sign. We ate separately, though we were 2 feet apart. She had a bite, then her phone buzzed, just once, then again. A third, insistent, urgent, intimate. She flinched like a touch she both wanted and feared. Work, she said without turning the phone over. At this hour, I asked. She nodded at her spoon. Deadlines. The rain wrote its long letters on the glass. I chewed my doubts slowly, not to spook them. Do you love me? I asked, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I needed to hear the way her mouth would shape a lie. She lifted her eyes, and they were someone else's for a moment. Of course, she said, and the word course was a curve I couldn't see around. Why would you ask that? Because everything felt slightly moved, as if a stranger had been inside our home and put the books back in the wrong order. After dinner, she went to shower. Steam climbed the hallway like a ghost learning to walk. I collected the plates, wanting to be the version of myself that gives her easy kindness on hard days. The phone buzzed again on the counter, stubborn and private. There's a rule in every relationship, written or not, about the boundary of devices. I had honored it even when I felt like a fool for doing so. That night I didn't mean to break it. I meant to put the phone on silent so the kitchen would stop chattering to itself. My fingers lifted it. It woke to a message preview that did not belong in our kitchen. Same time tomorrow. I can't stop thinking about. And then, like it had been trained, the message hid. Hot water thundered in the bathroom. I felt a sudden, strange calm, like the way your body knows it's losing blood and slows your heart down to save what it can. I set the phone down where I found it. I wiped my hands on a towel because they were shaking, or maybe because I wanted to wash them of a truth I didn't consent to knowing. When she came out, wrapped in that gray robe that clings to her shoulders as if it's afraid to be left behind, she saw me standing there, and she saw the phone, and then she saw the space between them like a crime scene line. I turned it to silent, I said, and my voice did not quite belong to me. Thanks, she answered too quickly, the S sharp enough to cut a sleeve. The steam slipped past us like a third person trying not to get involved. We stood in the small light by the sink, both pretending we had more time. Mara, I said, and it was a plea and a verdict. What's his name? She froze. An animal that has finally heard its own heartbeat too loudly to pretend it isn't running. She could have lied, she could have laughed, she could have been offended. Instead, she picked up the phone, placed it in her pocket, and said, I'm tired, like a prayer said to the wrong god. In the living room, the empty chair faced the window. The city breathed, indifferent and rain-washed. She moved toward the bedroom with the slow grace of someone carrying a fragile, invisible load. I stood there in the weak kitchen light and noticed a single glass ring on the counter, a perfect circle, a moon left behind by a glass that had already been lifted. The kettle clicked as it cooled. The apartment made that tiny, settling sound buildings make when they decide not to collapse today. "I'll sleep on the couch," I said to the room, to the rain, to the ghost of who we had been. No one answered. When the hallway light blinked out, it felt like a curtain dropping on the first act of a play, and I realized I had never learned my lines for the second. I lay down among cushions that smelled faintly of her shampoo. At some point a car passed, and its headlights crawled across the ceiling like a quiet confession. In the dark, I heard her footsteps stop at the bedroom door and not open it. Then nothing. The city kept humming. The rain kept counting. The page turned itself. Cliffhanger. Just before sleep took me by force, her phone buzzed one more time through the wall, and through the thin pane of silence between us, I heard her whisper a name that wasn't mine. Morning arrived gray and undecided, the sky the color of old bandages. Coffee found its way into a mug and sat steaming on the counter like a small campfire lit in a ruin. Mara avoided my eyes with the grace of someone trained in weathering storms she herself had summoned. "I have an early start," she said to the refrigerator door. "Okay," I said to the knife block. She pulled on her coat like armor. When the door clicked shut, the apartment exhaled in a way that made me dizzy. Loneliness is loudest the second after a door closes. The first day after you know is not the worst. It's the quiet rehearsal. You fold laundry like a surgeon suturing the air, careful, precise, tender with a tenderness that bruises your own fingers. You walk the rooms to understand their new geometry. The couch remembers your shape, but not your weight. The bedroom is a museum with signs that say, "Do not touch." The shower steam tries to be merciful, but even it knows there are things it cannot soften. Rain again, in fine, endless strings, like someone mending a sky that keeps tearing in the same place. Sleep learned a new cruelty, visiting like a landlord who knocks relentlessly and leaves the minute you answer the door. At 2:17 a.m., the ceiling fan became a witness, turning and turning as if it could wind the clock backward if it tried hard enough. Grief does not arrive as a single thing. It is a cluster of small creatures that take up residence: doubt, rage, self-blame, then the cold cat of numbness that lies on your chest and pretends to purr. I walked the kitchen floor in bare feet, counting tiles like penance. Messages arrived and were not answered. Friends asked for a quick beer, and I lied even to the no one listening. Busy tonight. Busy watching my life in the next room untether itself from my name. Then there were the traces, stray threads pulled from the sweater of who we were. A receipt shoved under a fruit bowl, 2 cocktails and a dessert for 2 at a neighborhood bar we never went to, dated on a night I'd been alone with a movie and her pillow. A new song in her playlist, played 27 times in 3 days, lyrics about collisions and almosts, and a city that doesn't forgive what it can't forget. A jacket that smelled faintly of tobacco, though she never once let smoke on her lungs. The other man announced himself not with a name, but with a collection of small weather systems that moved through our apartment and left microclimates behind. I found the first photo by accident, the way people say they found God or a tumor, stunned by the idea that something can be inside you the whole time without asking permission. The image lived in the photo's recently deleted album, like a reluctant refugee, a habit of hers: clear, then forget to clear the purgatory. It was a snapshot in poor light, grainy, a table edge, 2 glasses, their hands in a near touch, his sleeve with a charcoal cuff, a sliver of his jaw. The angle was secretive, as if the camera had been a dare she half regretted. "You look happy," I whispered to no one, and the room didn't argue because rooms can be cruelly honest. I didn't confront her that day. Instead, I let the truth sit in my chest like a guest without luggage. I learned his presence by absence dynamics. She laughed at her phone once, a sound I had craved, and it arrived not for me but because he made a sentence with the right tilt. When she sang in the shower, it was a new hum, a tune that didn't know the corners of our tile. I began to understand that betrayal is not a singular act, but a slow rearrangement of furniture done at night while the other person sleeps. You wake up, bruise your shin on a new table that grew there, and call it an accident. It isn't. The turning point did not arrive in fury. It came in the pathetic liturgy of a dropped spoon. I was washing dishes. The rain, faithful as ever, gave the window its quiet drum. The spoon slid from my hand, hit the sink, and made a small, apologetic sound. It felt like the whole house nodded. Enough. I dried my hands and wrote a list. Not a manifesto, just small, ordinary salvations. Buy fresh sheets. Open the windows even if it's cold. Run 3 miles, not fast, just steady. Call your brother. Cook for yourself as if you deserve it. Do not look for yourself in her silences. There is nothing there you need. That night, I slept 4 hours in a row. It felt like a miracle condescending to visit a human. In the morning, the light had the courtesy to soften instead of accuse. I made coffee for one and put a second mug out anyway, an experiment in phantom habits. I told the empty chair, "You can have it if you want," and felt less foolish than the day before. Strength, it turns out, doesn't arrive as armor. It arrives as the willingness to wash a dish and then another one. He had a name at last, delivered by the cruelty of a bank notification. A joint credit card we rarely used pinged my phone. Portside Hotel Bar, $48.96, MARA. Portside is 4 stops from us, a place with moody lighting and sickly ferns, and a bartender who looks like he's allergic to sincerity. I knew it because we had once judged it together. I Googled the bar, and there he was, tagged in a friend of a friend's photo. Marcus, smile like a good cover letter, the face of a man who's been told his whole life that doors notice him and open on their own. I didn't hate his face. Hate would have been a relief. I felt something thinner, an exhausted envy, like watching someone step innocently into a garden you tended and thinking, he will not notice the thorns until it's too late. I deleted the search history, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to guard something tender in myself from the labyrinth of his curated life. Recovery is 1,000 small refusals. I changed the sheets. I took the plant from the windowsill and moved it to the bedroom because it looked like it needed a different kind of light. I started running in the rain, the city blurring into a workable kind of solitude, breath stitching itself into a pattern I could trust. The hum of traffic began to sound like possibility instead of punishment. I learned the geography of the hours when you're not waiting for a door to open. When she came home that evening, later than she'd said, hair wind-tangled, cheeks bright with whatever the world had given her that wasn't me, I found a strange peace rise in me, steady and quiet. "We should talk," I said, setting my mug down with the care you give a thing you intend to leave behind gently. She looked at me, and I saw an old version of us flicker in her pupils, like a burned film frame catching light. "Okay," she said, and her voice sounded like someone who has prepared a confession but doesn't yet believe she's allowed to be forgiven. Cliffhanger. She opened her mouth, closed it, glanced at the bedroom like it might coach her, and finally said, "His name is Marcus," as the rain, for once, stopped mid-syllable, as if the sky itself wanted to hear what would happen next. Return does not always look like suitcases at the door. Sometimes it looks like the smallest crack in a practiced face. "His name is Marcus," she said again, slower, as if the word might change if spoken tenderly. We sat at the table like diplomats, negotiating a ceasefire in a country already lost. The light had gone that soft city gold that makes everyone look like they used to be easier to love. She wrapped her hands around a mug she didn't drink from. "It started small," she said. "Everything does," I answered, and hated how wise and petty that sounded. She flinched but nodded, grateful to be hurt by the truth and not the suspicion. "Do you love him?" is a question that kills 3 people every time it's asked. She stared at the steam rising from a drink too cold to make it. "I don't know," she said, "and if there's a worse answer, I haven't met it." "Then what is it?" I asked, not unkindly. She looked past me at the window where the city had turned itself into a constellation of apartment lights, each rectangle a separate universe in which someone else was eating, laughing, lying, leaving. "It's like being seen again," she said, voice thin, a violin string about to choose between music and breaking. "Like someone opened a window in a room I forgot was locked." "I thought we were windows," I said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a small funeral. She closed her eyes as if the lids might hide her from herself. "We were," she whispered. "And then life, I don't know, it got heavy. It turned me into someone who stands with her back to the glass." Her face did something complicated then, guilt, love, fear, a strange, fierce hope that did not include me. She reached across the table. I didn't flinch, not because I wanted her touch, but because I didn't want to teach my hand to fear what had once been home. Her fingers rested near mine, not touching, a nearness that once would have been intimacy, and now was a small, curated mercy. "I'm not here to beg," she said, which is what people say when their pulse is already kneeling. "I'm here because I owe the truth a room that isn't a hotel bar." A sad, precise sentence. I watched her mouth shape it and remembered laughing with that mouth, kissing it while a movie's credits rolled over our shoulders, quiet and endless. "Did you plan it?" I asked. "No," she said, quick then softer, "but once it had a shape, I stopped trying to unmake it. Honesty like that arrives with a sound, something in the chest unhooks and falls. I let it. "We can go to counseling," I said, surprising myself. The word we felt both too heavy and too light in my mouth. She blinked. "Do you want that?" I asked. "I want to be the person who wants that," she answered, and I nodded because I knew exactly where that kind of answer came from. "And him?" I said. She didn't look away. "He's not the point," she said, and I almost laughed. He is exactly the point and not at all the point, I said, and to our mutual surprise, we both smiled, a brief flicker of wit in a dying power grid. We tried a session with a counselor who had soft carpets and plants that had never known neglect. She asked us to speak in I statements. I feel abandoned. I feel erased. I feel like a person who didn't notice the water boiling because I was busy complimenting the pot. Mara's voice trembled once and then stood up straight. Mine stayed steady and then cracked on a nothing word like, and, which felt like just the sort of melodrama I'd promised myself to avoid. We walked out into a drizzle that hadn't earned the name rain, and she said, he texted me to ask how it went, and caught her own sentence in a net midair. I'm sorry, she added, and I believe she was, the way one believes weather forecasts, not because they are always right, but because we need to plan our shoes. Days became a strange choreography. We moved through rooms like respectful strangers with a shared lease. Sometimes I made her tea and put it on the table without a note. Sometimes she left pralines from the corner bakery, the kind she knows I like because they taste like afternoons that don't insist upon themselves. We did not touch, we spoke in sentences that tried to be both kind and honest and were therefore clumsy. Nights, I'd fall asleep to the hum of distant traffic and wonder if forgiveness was a door I could walk through alone and still call it forgiveness. Then came her return that wasn't a return. Late one night, the click of the lock, the soft thud of her bag, and her eyes rimmed red as if the day had sanded them down. She stood in the doorway of the living room, where I sat with a book I'd been pretending to read for 3 days. He wants me to leave you, she said, voice stripped down to its element. And do you want to? I asked, a kindness and a cruelty sharing a single chair. She swallowed. I don't want to be the woman who does this to you, she said. But I think I am. The sentence folded itself into the room like an animal choosing a spot to die. I can't keep you, I said. I know, she whispered. And I can't be kept, she added, like it was a secret she'd been withholding from herself. We stood there with the soft appliances hum performing a gentle illusion of domestic life. The rain had stopped. The city noise slipped in, freer now. I don't hate you, I said, and surprised myself by telling the truth. I'm not sure I know how to stop loving you yet, I added, another truth, this one more dangerous because it wanted to be brave and ended up being raw. She stepped forward then, slow, like approaching a wild animal, and reached for my face as if to memorize it for a test no one would grade. I let her palm rest on my cheek, not because it solved anything, but because sometimes endings require a ritual, even if all it offers is a place for the breath to land. I'm sorry, she said again, and the word had lost its shape from overuse. I know, I said, because we were out of words that did not wound. Then she did something neither of us had rehearsed. She set her keys on the console by the door. Not carefully, not dramatically, just an ordinary final sound. I'll go to my sister's for a while, she said. We can work out the rest with clear heads. She started to turn, then stopped, mouth open like a question she couldn't bear to ask. Do you want me to fight for this? She asked finally, and I felt the quiet gather at the edges of the room, waiting to see whether it would be a witness or a judge. Cliffhanger. I want you to be honest, I said, and in the silence that followed, her eyes filled and did not fall, holding a storm steady as if the outcome of our lives depended on whether one drop chose the path down. The morning we let go didn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrived soft and polite, an apology of light. The city found itself in a rare pause between forecasts, the sky a mild gray that didn't threaten or promise. I woke before the alarm and lay there listening to the apartment breathe, the hum of the fridge, the far-off hydraulic sigh of a bus, somewhere a neighbor's spoon against a mug, ordinary sounds, small, exact, reliable. The kind that remind you your life still lives even when parts of it are no longer yours to name. Coffee smelled like a kindness I had earned, finally. I poured it into the blue mug with the chipped lip, the one we always joked had character because it had survived a dozen near falls. I stood by the window and watched the street. A man in a yellow raincoat walked a dog who refused to be hurried. A woman balanced a paper bag of oranges as if the day could be saved by brightness. A delivery truck exhaled. The world made no room for tragedy, which is to say it made room for everything. I breathed into that space and let it return me to myself. She came by late morning, keys in her palm like punctuation. We had arranged it by text, 11, okay, the spareness of it suited us. When the lock turned, it did not object. She stepped in with the carefulness of a person arriving at a wake. We didn't hug, we didn't reach. The room was full of all the ways not to touch. She looked tired in the human way, not the melodramatic way. The kind of tired that comes from carrying two truths at once and trying to convince them to share a bed. I packed a bag, she said, and nodded toward the hallway, where a small, neat duffel leaned as if it had learned posture. I left the plant's schedule on the counter. I glanced and there it was, her handwriting angled, generous, certain, listing light and water like prayers for things that stand still and try. Thank you, I said and meant it. There is a love that cares for the plants you won't see bloom. It counts in ways records don't. We sat at the table with no props to invent normalcy. I told Marcus I need time, she said. I told myself I need more than that. The sentence didn't ask for permission. Good, I said, not because I wanted him to wait for her or fail her, but because I had finally understood that her future was not something I could afford to root against and still respect the man I was trying to keep alive. Forgiveness, it turns out, is not a door you open so someone can come back. It's a window you open so you can breathe. I didn't say it aloud. It rested in me like a warm stone. I forgive you, I said instead, and the room changed shape, not dramatically. The air just loosened. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The light found the table in a new angle. She closed her eyes and nodded, a tiny bow to the possibility that we could be people who survived this with a grace that might someday be called wisdom. I'm not asking to stay, she said. I know, I answered. I'm asking to leave the right way. I let the sentence sit. Okay, I said finally, then let's do it gently. We moved through the rooms like archivists. She took a scarf she loved and left a sweater I had bought that never quite fit. She carried a book to her bag, then put it back on the shelf, then touched its spine a second longer, then left it. In the bedroom, she paused at the window that used to frame our mornings and said, almost to herself, "The light is kinder here." It always was, I said, and we both accepted the small mercy of agreeing on something true. At the door she turned. There was no speech, no last-minute bid for a rewrite, just two people with an ending that wanted to be honored, not dramatized. I loved you, she said, and the past tense didn't wound the way it had the week before. I loved you too, I said, and then, because it was the right thing and the only thing, thank you for the years we got right. She looked like she might break, then didn't. Take care of the morning light, she said. It looks good on you, I nodded. Take care of the rain, I said. It listens to you. She left, the door closed. The apartment did not collapse. It expanded by an inch, enough for a new kind of air. I made another coffee, not as a crutch, but as a practice. I opened the windows, though it was barely warm enough, let the city in. The plant on the sill lifted its leaves like it had been waiting for this particular draft. I changed the sheets again, white this time, plain and clean. I put her empty mug in the cupboard, high up, not as a shrine, but as an acknowledgement of a chapter that knew how to end. In the afternoon, rain returned, but gentler, like someone who has learned not to shout. I stepped onto the balcony and let it find my face. People crossed the street with dignity, umbrellas making small, temporary rooms. There is a loneliness that heals instead of harms. It arrived then, a quiet space inside me that did not ache, it simply held. I didn't rush to fill it, I let it be what it was. The chair by the window looked less like an absence and more like an invitation. I sat, I listened to the city being exactly itself. In the days that followed, I learned the rituals of an honest morning. Coffee. A run along the river where the water reflected a sky that didn't owe me anything and still gave. Calls to my brother that didn't pretend to be casual. A slow, deliberate reclaiming of corners, shelf, drawer, thought. I stopped checking the phone for whether I couldn't control. I sent a final text. Thank you for the plant schedule. Be well. She wrote back, you too. No punctuation, no need. The message ended where it should. Forgiveness without reunion is a strange, brave species. It doesn't roar. It hums. It says, you are allowed to be changed and still be whole. One evening, the sun broke through in that late way that makes buildings look like they've been forgiven for being brick. The light entered the room and did not ask who else lived there. It rested on the table, found the old blue mug, and turned it into a small, ordinary cathedral. I stood in that light and let it name me. Closing line. The next morning, I woke before the rain, and in the quiet, finally understood that letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of belonging to myself again.